Gaming history can be weird, especially when it comes to console add-ons. The history of console add-ons is often bizarre and, at points, downright baffling. Some, like the Sega Mega CD and 32X, are infamous for their bizarre life cycles, both released with grand ambitions, both ultimately ending up as expensive miscalculations. Their failures are well documented, leaving behind an eternal debate over whether they were ever worth releasing in the first place. But Sega wasn't the only company guilty of this. Over in Japan, Nintendo had its own history of experimental hardware, most notably with the Famicom disk system, a proprietary disc-based add-on that introduced the world to games like The Legend of Zelda and Metroid. It was a clever piece of kit offering cheaper, rewritable media at a time when cartridge manufacturing was costly. However, what fewer people realise is that the Famicom disk system wasn't the only major add-on designed to expand the capabilities of Nintendo's 8-bit machine. In fact, nestled deep within Japan's ever-expanding world of obscure gaming peripherals was another, far more forgotten device, one that didn't just introduce a new way to play games, but also brought capabilities that had never been seen before with a Nintendo system. If you like obscure video game hardware, then hit that subscribe button, because I am Lady Decade and this is the story of the Bandai Datach joint ROM system, a mysterious Nintendo console add-on that you've probably never used. If you're watching this, chances are you love physical games. There's something satisfying about a shelf of game cases, flipping through manuals, and that little rush of nostalgia when you pop in a cartridge or disc. I get it, I'm the same. But let's not ignore the perks of digital gaming, especially if you're a PC gamer looking to grab the latest releases for a fraction of the price, or freshly revisit old favourites. That's where instant gaming comes in. It's a safe and easy way to get digital games at huge discounts. So rather than missing out on fantastic indie gems, digital exclusives and day one deals, you can pick them up for much less than on Steam and jump straight into playing. From massive discounts on Final Fantasy VII Rebirth to huge savings on retro classics like Shredder's Revenge, you can save up to 90% on thousands of modern AAA, retro and indie games right now. Don't miss out on the chance to build the ultimate PC game collection for next to nothing. Use my links below to grab these deals before they're gone. Happy shopping and enjoy the rest of today's video. During its life cycle, the Nintendo Famicom was nothing short of a juggernaut. It wasn't just the most popular console in Japan, it utterly dominated the market, leaving previous gaming platforms in the dust. But rather than simply become complacent, Nintendo would come up with a grand new plan. In 1986, they introduced the Famicom disk system, the ambitious add-on that famously allowed players to use floppy disk-like media instead of cartridges. This device brought several advantages: cheaper game production, rewritable storage, and even the ability to save progress, something that was practically unheard of at the time. But despite its initial promise, the disk system became obsolete a lot faster than intended. This was thanks to advancements in cartridge technology. So by 1987, The Legend of Zelda, which had been a disk system exclusive, was available on the NES in America as a standard cartridge with a battery save function, no less, essentially negating one of the add-on's biggest selling points. So if cartridge technology was already proving superior, this raises the valid question of why the Famicom would receive yet another add-on years later. Well, this is where Bandai comes in. Releasing in December 1992, 9 years into the Famicom's life cycle, the Datach joint ROM system wasn't just another attempt at expanding the console's capabilities. It was something entirely different, a product designed to not only exploit a loophole that would allow Bandai to bypass Nintendo's strict cartridge licensing fees, but also serve an additional, more novel purpose. As I've covered before on this channel, Bandai's gaming history runs deeper than most people realise. Long before the Famicom even existed, they were dabbling in home consoles, though, let's be honest, none of those early attempts set the world on fire. But when Nintendo's 8-bit machine took Japan by storm, Bandai wasn't about to sit on the sidelines. Instead, they struck up a lucrative relationship with Nintendo, publishing a steady stream of third-party games for the Famicom. However, there was one big problem. Cartridge production wasn't cheap. Even Nintendo themselves had to eat significant manufacturing costs, and for third parties, the financial burden was even worse. Not only did they have to cover production expenses, but they also had to pay Nintendo's hefty licensing fees just for the privilege of getting their games onto the system. Like any business-minded and slightly opportunistic company, Bandai saw a loophole that needed exploiting. They knew that if they tried to manufacture their own unlicensed cartridges, Nintendo would crush them like an ant. Not only with lawsuits, but by also cutting off access to their all-important distribution network. So, the mission was clear. Find a way to create cheaper cartridges while keeping Nintendo happy enough to let it slide. As pointed out in my previous upload, Bandai wasn't the only one trying this. Around the same time as the Datach, an American company named Codemasters, infamous for making unlicensed NES games, attempted a similar cost-cutting trick with the Aladdin Deck Enhancer. However, there was one key difference. The Aladdin Deck Enhancer had no gimmick. It was purely a cost-saving measure, whereas the Datach actually introduced a unique barcode scanning feature to justify its existence. This meant that instead of being shut down by Nintendo's iron grip, the Datach joint ROM system was given official approval, allowing Bandai to bypass traditional Famicom cartridge licensing while manufacturing their own games in-house. This meant lower costs, faster development times, and, most importantly, greater control over their own software production. So while both Bandai and Codemasters attempted to game the system, only one of them got Nintendo's blessing as an officially licensed product. And as a result, the Datach from the start instantly had a far better chance of survival than the Aladdin ever did. But let's be real, Nintendo wasn't about to let Bandai create a device that played standard Famicom cartridges for free. Exactly, that's why this add-on would function very differently. You see, in order to make this loophole work, Bandai needed to serve up something distinct enough to justify its existence. The results? A completely unique Famicom add-on unlike anything else on the market. At its core, the Datach joint ROM system functions as a bridge between the Famicom and Bandai's own custom game cartridges. The device connects to the Famicom's cartridge slot, sitting directly on top of the console, almost like an oversized adapter. Instead of inserting a standard Nintendo licensed cartridge, players would insert smaller proprietary Datach cartridges into the unit's dedicated slot at the back. Unlike regular Famicom cartridges, these Datach exclusive carts were significantly smaller, roughly half the size of traditional games. One side was flat with a title sticker, while the other was angled inward with notches, which aligned with the spring pins inside the Datach unit, a deliberate design choice to prevent compatibility with regular Famicom games. But under the hood, the Datach had some unusual tech for the time. It featured an external EEPROM chip, a type of built-in memory that allowed games to store saved data or settings directly onto the cartridge, something that was practically unheard of on the Famicom. This meant that Datach games could retain player data without relying on a bulky battery backup, making it a pretty advanced feature for 1992. Of course, Nintendo wasn't going to let Bandai get away with just making cheaper cartridges. There had to be a hook. Something unique, something gimmicky enough to justify this whole arrangement, and that's where the Datach's main feature comes in. The built-in barcode scanner is located right on the front of the device. The Datach joint ROM system hit shelves in December 1992, launching with a big-name license that made sure it got plenty of attention. Dragon Ball Z Gekito Tenkaichi Budokai. With Dragon Ball Z being one of Bandai's biggest cash cows, it made perfect sense to lead with a title that would immediately grab the shonen crowd's interest. But despite this strong start, things didn't exactly take off. Between 1992 and 1994, only 6 additional games were ever developed for the Datach, making it one of Bandai's more obscure gaming ventures. However, what really sets these games apart and makes a Datach more than just another weird Famicom add-on is how they integrated barcode scanning into gameplay. What made these titles different from others is that each Datach game came with a set of special glossy barcode cards featuring character artwork on the front and a unique barcode on the back. Players swiped these cards through the Datach's front-facing scanner, which then read the barcode and used it to determine in-game content. Take Dragon Ball Z Gekito Tenkaichi Budokai for example. Instead of selecting characters from a menu, players unlocked and played as fighters by scanning their corresponding barcode cards. Each card represented a different character from the Dragon Ball Z universe, and the game would pull their stats directly from the barcode. This wasn't just a visual gimmick. Each fighter's health points, battle points, and defense points were encoded into the unique barcode, meaning their in-game power levels actually aligned with their TV show counterparts. So, if you chose Yamcha and your friend chose Super Saiyan Vegeta, well, congratulations, because you're gonna get cucked. While the Dragon Ball Z game focused on character selection and stat-based battles, other Datach games use barcode scanning in different ways. With J-League Super Top players, in this one, instead of selecting teams traditionally, players scanned barcodes to determine player stats. Each card corresponded to a real J-League footballer, making this one of the earliest examples of barcode-based sports simulation. Yu Yu Hakusho Bakuto and Koku Buju Tsukai functioned almost identically to Dragon Ball Z, with players swiping barcode cards to unlock different fighters from the Yu Yu Hakusho anime. And Battle Rush, a build-up robot tournament, took advantage of possibly the most creative use of barcode scanning. In this one, instead of simply selecting pre-made characters, players built and customized their own robots by scanning different barcodes to mix and match robot parts. This allowed for custom robot builds, making it the most mechanically deep game in the lineup. But wait, there's more. Another interesting aspect of the Datach was that some games, particularly Battle Rush, allowed players to experiment with scanning non-official barcodes. This meant that players could try scanning barcodes from food packaging, household items, or other sources to see if they unlocked anything new. However, not all games supported this. Most Datach titles relied strictly on pre-printed official barcode cards. Still, for the few that did, this added an extra layer of experimentation that made the barcode gimmick feel more interactive. But as novel a concept as all of this was, none of this was quite as new as you might think. This might sound like an early version of the Game Boy Advance's e-card reader, but the Datach's barcode mechanic actually has closer ties to an earlier device, one developed by Epoch. Now, Epoch isn't exactly a household name today, but before Nintendo's Famicom took over Japan, Epoch actually held the title of Japan's most successful home console manufacturer. Their CassetteVision, released in 1981, was the biggest console in Japan before Nintendo arrived and changed the industry forever. So, Epoch may have faded into obscurity, but they did have a respectable amount of gaming pedigree. Fast forward to 1991, and Epoch would introduce a handheld gaming device that likely inspired Bandai's Datach, the Barcode Battler. Just like Datach, the Barcode Battler came with a range of cards, each featuring barcodes that players could scan into the system. The catch? Instead of selecting characters in a fighting game, these barcodes were used to generate stats, power levels, and battle outcomes. Scanning barcodes, like with certain Datach games, weren't just limited to the cards that came with the system. With barcodes being everywhere in daily life, players were encouraged to experiment, scanning items from food packaging, household products, and anything they could get their hands on to see what kind of characters or power-ups they could generate. It sounds like a niche concept, but here's the crazy part. It actually worked. The Barcode Battler was a huge success in Japan, and while it might seem like a strange, almost pointless gimmick to Western audiences, it resonated with Japanese gamers in a big way. So naturally, Bandai wanted a piece of that action, but instead of creating a separate handheld, they decided to bring barcode-based gaming to the Famicom. But what's even more interesting is that this obscure console war started well before the Barcode battle. Before Nintendo and Sega became the kings of the gaming industry, it was Bandai and Epoch who were the two main companies already battling it out in the early days of the Japanese console gaming wars. While Bandai ultimately shifted focus towards licensing and publishing, Epoch kept experimenting with new ideas, one of which was the Barcode Battler, the system that would heavily inspire Bandai's own Datach. This raises another question though. With Japan already in love with barcode-based gaming, why didn't the Datach ever make its way over to the NES in the West? Well, to understand that, we need to take another look at the Barcode Battler. At the time, marketers genuinely believed that Western gamers would be just as captivated by barcode scanning mechanics as their Japanese counterparts. The idea of scanning random barcodes from everyday products to unlock mysterious in-game stats seemed like a novel, almost futuristic concept to some. But, as with many Japan to West gaming trends, things did not go according to plan. Here in the UK, the Barcode Battler's launch was met with one of the most ridiculous moral panics in gaming history. In a now hilarious BBC News piece, concerned parents and consumer groups went into full meltdown mode, warning that barcode-based gaming would lead to skyrocketing shopping bills. The fear? That children would nag their parents relentlessly to buy extra food, cleaning products and whatever else they could get their hands on, just so they could scan the barcodes and see what would happen. The British media would report that this had already become an issue in Japan, with parents supposedly bankrupting themselves under the crushing weight of their kids' barcode addiction. In response, the UK Family Welfare Association stepped in, claiming that they were backed by psychologists who believed that the Barcode Battler would lead to schoolyard status wars, where kids would pressure their parents into buying unnecessary products just to keep up with their friends. Naturally, Tomy UK, the distributor for the Barcode Battler, was having none of this utter nonsense. Their director, Peter Brown, dismissed the doomsday predictions outright, essentially saying that these scaremongers were talking out of their arses. According to him, the only real side effect of barcode-based gaming was that kids would hold on to more packaging instead of chucking it in the bin, which, if anything, was a good thing. As it turns out, though, everyone was wrong. There was no epidemic of kids forcing their parents into financial ruin, nor was there a sudden surge in recycling efforts thanks to barcode hoarding. Instead, the Barcode Battler flopped spectacularly in the West. And honestly, it's not hard to see why. The system was bare bones, to say the least. It had no graphics, no sound effects, no real interactivity, just numbers on a screen. It was less of a video game and more of a calculator that had been tricked into thinking it was fun. In Japan, where repetition and stats-based gameplay tend to be more appealing, the land where Dragon Quest and Final Fantasy were huge, the Barcode Battler found its niche. But outside of its homeland, Western kids took one look at it and immediately went, "Ugh. Brother, ugh. I'm playing Game Boy." Taking the Barcode Battler's failure into account and the Datach's late release in the Famicom's life cycle, it's not hard to see why Bandai never bothered to bring the add-on to the NES. It simply had no shot at success internationally, and in most of the West, we hadn't even been introduced to Dragon Ball Z yet. The Datach had an undeniably Japan-centric lineup of games, so it's no wonder the Datach never made it outside of its homeland. After all, games that had relied heavily on anime branding and the barcode gimmick would have made them a tough sell in the West, especially after the Barcode Battler flopped internationally. So, where does this all leave us? As covered on this channel earlier this week, Bandai would later introduce the Safami Turbo, a cartridge-based add-on for the Super Famicom that once again allowed them to bypass Nintendo's expensive licensing fees and manufacture their own bespoke cartridges. With this attempt, This time, Bandai introduced a dual cartridge system, allowing players to link data between two different Safami Turbo games. On paper, it was an interesting idea, but in reality, it was just another loophole, a way for Bandai to bypass Nintendo's expensive cartridge licensing fees yet again. Today, the Bandai Datach joint ROM system stands as one of the many bizarre footnotes in gaming history, an ambitious yet ultimately niche attempt at bringing barcode-based gaming to the Famicom. While it never quite took off, it's a fascinating reminder of the experimental nature of the early 90s gaming landscape. Bandai may not have revolutionized gaming with the Datach, but they certainly left behind a curiously unique relic that still holds a special place in the world of obscure console add-ons. I have a whole library of videos on bizarre old gaming hardware, so subscribe if you are into this sort of thing. Don't forget you can save up to 90% on thousands of modern AAA, retro and indie games right now. Don't miss out on this chance to build the ultimate PC game collection for next to nothing, and use my links below to grab these deals before they disappear. Or if you want to support my work in a more personal way, gain access to my cosplay photo library and more by becoming a backer over on Patreon. I'll see you all again in the next video.